Few years ago, my anxiety was high. I was already at a point in my life where I thought I was a little out of it. But that was amplified a lot when I kept repeatedly hearing noises outside of my window. Like every single night, it just wouldn't stop. I would finally get so freaked out I'd go wake my parents up and get them to look outside, but they never found anything. I started to think I was going crazy, or subconsciously seeking attention. One morning, my grandfather discovered one of our lawn chairs beneath our bathroom window. It's pretty high up, and the bottom pane is fogged, so I'm not sure the chair even helped, but it was there regardless. The next night, heard sounds again. Nothing. The night after that one, however, we checked outside and discovered something that made my stomach cramp. A small stepladder was sitting directly outside of my window, back just enough to allow someone to sit on it but still see inside. On my windowsill was a bag of now cold McDonald's, which is just up the street from me. Most of the food was still in there, but still, some freak had been watching me, doing absolutely nothing of interest in my room without me even knowing for I don't know how long. The cops were called. Nothing happened. I felt crazier than ever. No one was to be found, but at least we had some evidence that someone that shouldn't be hovering around our house was at my window, watching intently through the blinds in the space between the two curtains. Heard noises again the next night. I ran outside, but of course, nothing. Earlier in the night I'd sewn my two curtains together, which hopefully made it harder to see in. Apparently it did, because now the freak had taken to climbing on top of our air conditioning unit, and from there, climbing onto our garage, then standing up on that so he could see above where the drapes went. The handprints and shoe prints were left on the lid to prove it. I should also mention that there were now holes in my sunscreen, and I heard these holes being created. He took a stick and sharpened it somehow. We found it outside of my window, and he was trying to stealthily break away the screen bit by bit. The next night I distinctly heard the gravel near my window crunch. There was simply no mistaking my sound. As quietly as I could, I let out a small moan he surely heard and rolled just out of view as if I were sleeping. Then pressed myself against the wall out of view of the window, very quietly opened my door and crept down the hall. My heart was pounding. Normally I knock on my parents' door, but I knew the slightest sound would make the bastard bolt, so I quietly opened their door and sneaked in. I informed them that there was, without a single doubt, someone outside of my window right now. They didn't mind my intrusion and got up. We got dressed, formulated a plan and crept to the back door. I ran to the bathroom to stand on the edge of our tub and peek out the window just as the back door was thrown open by my parents, who ran outside like morons. And sure enough, they saw him. They started screaming as the man leaped off of the Herbie and bolted down our driveway, which was the one I was looking at. Completely drenched in emotion, they screamed all sorts of horrible things at the top of their lungs. He ended up escaping across the street, hiding behind the house adjacent to us. The balls on this bastard. He kept peeking out at us as we all stood outside, but we wanted to leave him there so the cops could finally grab him. They were called, they came, and they searched, but they never found him. The bastard must have hopped the fence or some shit. Still to this day I hear sounds outside my window, even in the dead of winter, but he's never out there anymore. He might have just been a peeper, but he targeted me specifically and for months, until he was almost caught. What really pisses me off is that once he lost interest in me because it was too unsafe, he moved onto a house down the street with two little girls. He actually managed to get in through their window, and their dad caught him just standing in the middle of the room, watching them sleep. But to this day the bastard hasn't been caught yet. All I know is that it could have been worse, but it messed me up. I trust the men in my neighborhood even less now. The men around here stare very blatantly. All these years later I still hear stuff outside of my window and freak out. I turn out my lights entirely to exercise. I do my best to avoid the windows when I undress. The whole thing just scarred me, and it's something I'm going to have to deal with for the rest of my life. This happened to me during my first year of university in October. I was living in the dorms, and I need to give you a brief rundown of them. You need a keycard to gain access to your specific floor. So even though someone on the 3rd floor and 4th floor live in the same building, they can't access each other's floors. I had injured myself playing sports, so I was under the orders to rest, which meant no Halloween parties for me. Pretty sad for a horror fiend like myself, but to try and make the time a happy one, I busied myself to help making costumes for other people and doing their makeup. Once I was finally finished, I packed up my makeup and decided to watch some movies in my room. A guy popped up and introduced himself. We chatted a bit and exchanged email addresses, and I walked back to my room and said goodbye. The first warning sign was that he walked into my room behind me, despite me saying I was going to walk into my room. I felt really awkward and tried to say in a roundabout way that he needed to leave. But he wasn't getting the hint. I finally had to say, "You need to leave my room, now." I chalked this up to him maybe being drunk or something, but I wonder how he got onto the floor if he wasn't with anyone partying. Before I went to bed that night, I checked my mail and there were 5 from him. The first being, "Hey, I'm so glad we're friends," and the rest asking why I wasn't online. A few days later, I got a knock on my door when I was studying, and it was him. I explained that I was studying and needed privacy. He tried to walk into my room again, but I braced my arm on the frame and said firmly that I needed to study. The next day he was at my door again, and the next. I began pretending that I was not home. Another day there was a knock at my door, and when I checked the peephole, there was no one there, and I assumed the postman had come. I opened the door, and lo and behold, it was the creepy guy. He had begun hiding from the people so I would be more likely to answer the door. I told my roommate never to open the door if he was there, and I told people living on my floor that this guy was beginning to creep me out. So if he wanted to get on the floor, whatever sob story he gave them, don't let him in. A few days after that, I was on the bus coming home and I got a text from someone who lived on my floor, telling me not to come home because the creep was on my floor and he was sitting right in front of my door, just waiting. I went to a friend's house and spent the night, and when I got home, I was told he waited for 4 hours before leaving. At this point, I was getting freaked out. A few days after that, he began waiting outside the building, and if I left, he would follow me wherever I went. I was too spineless to tell him to go away, and I tried to be more passive about it. I never spoke, and never gave any indication I was paying attention, but he followed me to class, the cafeteria, and always tried to follow me home and get access to the floor. I finally went to the resident advisor, an older student that sort of watches over the floor, and told her what happened. She spoke to the RA of his floor, and was told that the creep had been telling his own RA that we were best friends and dating. My RA tried to explain that I was uncomfortable, but the other RA believed him, and that was that. Thankfully, one thing did scare him off. He would never approach me if I was with a whole group of people, so my floor mates banded together. If I went to dinner, I went with my floor, and if I wanted a drink or seconds, someone had to come with me. Walking to class and even waiting for the bus was done in a group. He got onto my floor once when someone else was coming home and he forced his foot in the door to let himself in. I was hidden in another room, and when he left my door to go and sit in the TV lounge waiting for me, I went downstairs and ran around to the other side of the building and got into my room before he noticed me. Then the phone calls began. I never gave him my number, but he somehow obtained my mobile and my room phone. At first it would be 1 or 2 phone calls a day, until I told him I wanted him to leave me alone. Then the calls began coming in every hour, with him begging and pleading for me to talk to him. Without caller ID, I needed to answer the phone because of school and my part-time job. At this point it was November, and I was a wreck. I was tired of having to plan out doing simple things like going for food or walking to a bus stop. Stress wasn't helping me recover from my injury, and I was losing weight, and I just looked sickly. I went back to the resident advisor and begged her to help me. She went to the head of the dorms and explained everything that happened. I explained how far this had gone, and my roommate told them that he had followed her a few times, demanding that she tell him where I was. I felt awful. She never told me this because she was afraid of upsetting me further, and I felt like I was an asshole for putting her through this garbage. I don't know what went on behind closed doors. From what I guess, he was told to leave me alone, and any further contact would result in him being kicked out of the dorms. There was one email where he went insane on me, telling me how awful I was. How could I do this to him? We were so happy together. Surely I was cheating on him with other men. After that, nothing. At first, when I'd see him around campus, I would run to the women's toilet to hide. I'd see him around town or on campus, and he'd always just stare at me. Never tried to approach me, never tried to get my attention, just staring. About a month after I joined Quora, I had an issue with a stalker. It was around the month of February 2018, and this was back when I was still new, not as popular as I am right now. This guy with an Arab sounding name had commented on one of my answers. It was a harmless comment, and so being naive and innocent to the online world of creeps, trolls and stalkers, I commented back politely like I used to do. A few minutes later, the guy commented again, and so we had a little back and forth comment thread going on. It wasn't until he said two simple words that the alarms in my head started to ring quietly. Friend me. Confused, I asked him what he meant, assuming it was a male looking at the name. He said he wanted to be my friend on Facebook, and when I told him politely and as nicely as possible that I didn't friend random people on social media unless I know them more, he became a different person. He started to spam comment and say information that he shouldn't have known about me. Like the name of my school, the name of my family business, and where I lived. He had found my Facebook page and could see the information about me. This is when the alarms in my head started to blare loudly, and I immediately blocked him and reported him, while my heart raced in my chest. Scenarios of him finding me and kidnapping me, hurting me, were flashing in my head and I was freaking out. At this time, I was friends with my ex. This was before we had started dating, and so I went to him and he calmed me down, and got a whole bunch of friends from Quora and hangout groups to block him and report him for harassment. After the guy found out I had blocked him, he purposely made another account with the same name, and started to spam comment again on the same answers. Thankfully my Quora settings were set that only people who I follow can message me, so he couldn't message me. I blocked him and I reported the second account immediately. I then changed my Facebook settings so that no one can see my personal information anymore, and I deactivated my account for about a week. After that, I never heard or seen him again. I am now very careful who I follow back, who I interact with, and I always make sure I check out the profile before following back. I do not want to go through that ever again. It scared the living hell out of me to this day. If I see a name like this, I tense up. So I advise everyone to be careful with who you interact. Yes, there are lots of extremely nice people. I've met so many amazing friends and people on social media. But there are always trolls and even stalkers who want to scare you, mess with you, or even hurt you. If you made it this far into the video, thank you. The next story is a longer one and very intense. So, get ready. My freshman year of college was one of the funnest years of my life, and some of my fondest memories are from that year. But it was also the scariest and strangest year to date, and I'm 31 right now. I still sometimes wonder how this really happened, and it didn't end up a nut job, and it still freaks me out to this day. I've only talked about this once or twice since it happened 13 years ago. Here it goes. August 2001. Like most freshmen, I live in the dorms at a state party school. I opted out of the good school I got into. I guess I had a little steam to blow off after graduating from military college prep boarding school. Plus, after a sports injury, I didn't exactly have any specific plan for life that went past Saturday night, if you know what I mean. A good buddy from military school, Bill. Went to the same college and lived a few floors below in the same dorm as me. So of course, we were getting the party started before my parents' exhaust fumes had even evaporated from the parking lot. For the most part, the first month or so of college was pretty much like that. I went to most of my classes, partied just about every night, chased girls around, and that was enough for the moment. But things began to change one night sometime in mid-September, and college for me would never be normal again. My dorm phone rings in the middle of the night. Hello? On the other end, I can only really describe the voice as the kind of you picture when you think about a computer talking. Kind of like the early model car GPSs. Hi Gary, how are you today? Not fully awake, I'm just confused at this point. Who is this? He repeats. Hi Gary, how are you today? It becomes clear I'm being messed around with, so I hang up and chuckle. Man, freaking Bill, nice one. And I pass back out. I end up forgetting about the call for a few days and never mention it to Bill or anyone else. About a week later, I get another call around the same time of night. Hi Gary, I'm watching you. Nice. Very cliché. Seriously Bill, how are you not knee-deep in Everclear or Tri-Delt at this hour? Enough already. Jape is going to start getting pissed. And I hang up. I casually confront Bill at breakfast the next morning, purposely not trying to bite too hard to give him a payoff that might incentivize continued calls. I also wasn't 100% it was actually him, and not another one of my douchebag friends. He gives a genuinely confused response. Whatever. So a couple of days after the second call, I come home and see I had multiple messages on my answering machine. What the F? I barely knew that thing even worked. It's computer voice guy. Message 1. Hi Gary, I'm watching you. Message 2. I thought I asked you to answer my calls, Gary. Last message. Where might Gary be on a Tuesday night? Okay. So one of my friends is clearly a jackass or bored enough to really push for a reaction here. The next day, I play the messages for Jade, who was around during the calls, which were apparently earlier in the night when he was still awake. He'd been a close buddy since we were in junior high, but we sort of taken separate paths after high school. So anyway, he's aware I'm a wild child and thinks nothing of the first couple messages. By the third, he's a little spooked. I then walk down to a couple other buddies' rooms and casually but immediately bring up the subject. Nothing. Over the next couple of days, I press all close friends and semi-close friends, but get 0 answers and 0 suspects. The calls start coming more frequently over the next couple months, starting at once a week, then to once every 2-3 days, up to every day by Christmas break. I don't say anything to my family at that point, although I really should have. What started out as a decent beginning of college turned out into not showing up for any classes, tests, nothing. Grades reflect, and I'm too busy answering for my .67 GPA to talk about some dumb prank that would likely be dismissed as a pathetic attempt at grades explanation. So it goes. Uneventful break, and back to school determined to become a new man. I gotta get my stuff together with these grades, so I tell Bill I'm gonna have to chill out and focus on school. First night back, I get my first spring semester call from computer voice guy. How's your family in Cyprus? Okay, now this is some freaking BS, man. What kind of douchebags am I hanging out with that even have the discipline to drag out a prank for this long? Calls become threatening and downright dark. I'm very interested, Gary, in being close to you. Yeah, with the kind of weird sentence structures like that. I have tools I can bring. It is going to be all over soon. One day, I bring Bill and all my other buddies up to hear the messages. Never deleted a single one for some reason. I guess when things happen over longer periods of time, You don't really feel the impact until laying out the complete package of evidence. My friends are in shock. I guess I should mention that some of these calls got really specific in making sure to note specific details about my parents' address, as well as the violence they are planning on doing to me. Cut open your esophagus, Gary, with a butter knife. And all sorts of other crap that is sort of blurred together through the hundreds upon hundreds of calls I got over the school year. A chick friend of mine that I'd really liked in high school named Layla goes to a different school hundreds of miles away. We've reconnected thanks to good old AIM and talk from time to time on the phone. Computer voice guy had mentioned a couple of times your friend and made threats about this unspecified person from time to time. But your friend turned out into your friend Layla. Layla and I are the only two people ever named in these calls, but it did get me wondering if this was a new lead to the source. Layla was clueless when I called her out about it. Awesome. I know that background was a long explanation, but you'll understand why I had to explain the situation when I tell you about what happens next. One night, we're all partying and drinking at some hotel. A different buddy, Carl, has a nice big truck we'd all go everywhere in, but he'd passed out drunk at the hotel after pounding an entire bottle of whatever he drank that night. I'm not really drinking tonight. I want to get back to my own bed. I snatched Carl's keys to drive back to campus, thinking I'll drive back in the morning to get everyone. This was one of the few times I'd even driven that year, so it wasn't tip-top on my directions. I make an early turn and I'm somehow down a road I've never seen before. I realize this pretty quick, but I figure I've got some general directions of campus pegged, so I can just continue the wrong road until hitting some familiar highway that I knew. I'd eventually have to hit that as close to campus. I'm finding myself in open fields, still a paved road and everything, but aside from the road there was absolutely nothing, and it was completely black. Around 3 AM, there's this really strange four-way stop I come upon. Strange because I'm probably the fourth person in a year to drive on that road. Anyway, I trudge along, eventually get to the familiar highway, and home free. A few days later, computer voice guy interrupts his usual depraved threatening to mention that specific four-way, day, and time that I was on. Which, like I said, was around 3 AM, and there wasn't a soul in sight. So yeah, I now realize computer voice guy is obviously tracking my movements somehow. Keep in mind, I later joined the military, worked in the intelligence community, and worked special operations and tracked bad guys all around the world. To this day, I still can't figure out how this dude knew I was in the middle of those fields on that date, in the middle of the night. I never mentioned it to anyone. Around March, this apparent rendezvous became computer voice guy's focal point, and he'd make sure to let me know the day was close. The calls were coming in no fewer than 10 or 15 every single day. Seriously. The ringer was now off out of courtesy to Jade, and I turned down the volume of answering machine as his phone calls recorded. But I finally get the message I'd been waiting for. Keep in mind, I've now become somewhat infamous at this university by now, because of computer voice guy. People were constantly knocking on my door wanting to hear the messages. Friends of whomever I knew. It was all people wanted to hear about at parties. For a split second it was cool, because I'm pretty sure I ended up getting a few dates indirectly from introductions conceived through interest in the guy with the stalker. Don't judge me. Moving right along. The day, time, and location are set. In one of his messages he said, "We will meet in front of the Coleman Hall at midnight, Wednesday, 27th of April, and we will take our friendship to the next level." I know what you're thinking. And yeah, throughout the year, I had considered the possibility that I was dealing with a female. Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. And I was definitely that kind of dude when I was 18 or 19 years old. The kind of dude that could attract clinginess and anger. But I started to rule out female for various reasons that only a fellow ENFJ would understand. Look it up if you're not tracking. I can build profiles with a very high ratio of accuracy to available information. This creep just didn't feel like a female to me. It didn't even feel like a peer. I was convinced I was dealing with a mid-30s wild male computer nerd that I'd come into contact with at some point in my life. It doesn't really matter, because what I ended up finding on Wednesday 27th of April, which by the way was Layla's birthday, interesting, I was wrong. Of course, everyone wants to be a part of this juicy story, and there's a pretty ridiculous amount of testosterone floating around the dorm on game day. This was a real creepster and a legit horror story unfolding before their very eyes. These guys are ready to defend me with their lives. So, while these monkeys are getting all hopped up on Mountain Dew, I stay home that afternoon, wondering what the F I was going to do at midnight. Of course, I was going to go, but dude. Yeah, I've always been an athlete in good shape, wrestling, football, baseball teams, yada yada. But I'm still a 90-year-old white male, good parents, grew up middle upper class with suburbia, had a good life. In other words, I can definitely hold my own in a street fight. But this, whatever this is, doesn't feel anything like a street fight, or any other kind of fight I'd ever been in. This is a disturbed, violent, angry, possibly grown-ass psychopath that has decided to dedicate almost a full year now of his life to targeting and terrorizing me. So yeah, I'm a little freaking nervous. My home team crowd steadily built up throughout the afternoon and evening, with probably close to 70 or 80 guys grouped up at our dorm's common area. Once the party hour approaches, though, over half of the guys splinter off into other various propositions that probably included more traditional fun, like beer bongs and girls. I'm left with about a 15 or 20 member platoon. I had decided earlier that I was not going to allow all these knuckleheads to shadow me, but I could definitely use them in case of emergency. I didn't want to risk him spooking out of the meat, so I let them know they will need to stay inside of the doors of the common area while I walk out to the meeting spot. Coleman Hall was adjacent to our connected girls' dorm, and about 300 paces outside door to get to Coleman. It was finally time. The witching hour came. So I finally leave the crew to begin the longest couple hundreds or so paces of my life. My boys can see me through the glass doors, but wouldn't really be able to see much once I get to the Coleman Hall door. About 100 paces out from the spot, I observed two things at the time. One, some kind of small quick movement in front of the patio walkway that goes all the way around the building. And two, the movement was in a spot along the walkway where the only normally uber bright bulb is out. I'm not exactly sure how I was able to see him, but I suddenly realized someone is crouched behind one of these contagious cookie butter bushes outside of the patio perimeter against one of the building pillars. In dark clothes and a hoodie, he's a few feet off from the path where I'm supposed to meet him, and positioned to where I really should not have been able to see him, given the pillar was blocking any shadow, plus the burned out light, which I later found out was smashed. In fact, I could have easily walked all the way to the door without ever noticing someone down there. I sorta jumped mid-step as this happens, and I see him raise up a little, thinking I might have seen him. I see him raise up and take a step towards me, and my fight or flight starts to hit. I've learned that my particular fight or flight chooses fight in more mild situations, flight during intense situations. But for shit your pants situations, it's scarier to run away with your back to whatever scary shit I'm dealing with. So I fight. Before I realize what I'm doing, I'm in a dead sprint towards this creep, who I'm guessing sees what I can't yet, which is my friend platoon busting through the glass doors in hot pursuit. The creep nopes the F out of there, running on patio alongside Coleman Hall toward the parking lot. I can tell this isn't a mid-30s computer nerd I predicted. He's above average height, above average broad, and built athletically. That's about all I could tell about him really. I'm not even sure if he was white, because he was at least tan, if not Hispanic, Middle Eastern or something. I'm really booking it, as he turns right on a dime at the edge of the building. I realize I'm moving fast enough to catch up with him, but everyone else is really far behind. I also realize I'm moving so fast I won't be protected as I turn hard right at the corner of the building. If he stops there, I'm toast. As I turn the corner, I see the van sitting alone in the parking lot in front of me. It's running, and brake lights flicker on and off, park, into drive, and begins inching forward towards the exit. Home Slice is of course heading for the van, which for some reason sent this whole new level of fear into me. This is it. This is really happening, and I'm getting the F murder tonight. But I can't stop. Something keeps me moving forward. I guess I'd come this far, dealt with this crazy BS for almost a full year now, completely unable to do anything other than try to ignore it. I'm not exactly going places academically at this point, and my life doesn't quite have all that much purpose to it yet. If I'm going to get whacked, I will at least know, and this crap will at least be over. Plus, I still have a chance to catch this madman before he gets away. If I could get close enough to dive tackle, I would still be on my own to deal with the creep, his driver, and now I realize there's a third person that was manning the sliding door. Awesome. I don't care how badass you think you are when you're a 19-year-old jock. Your chances of taking down 3 grown men that are already violent criminals and prepared to victimize are about 1 in never gonna happen, buddy. Anyway, my turn is wide and slow due to being full on sprint, and I lose ground. I'm probably 20 yards from the lot when he does a flying leap into the side of the van. There couldn't have been any rows of seat in the van for a leap like that. Creep number 3 slams the sliding door shut as the van peels out of the parking lot. Bangs a right and gone in an instant. The relief of not being kidnapped, bound and gagged in that van with 3 psychos who most likely had some pretty horrific plans for me is now just as strong as the dread of the fact that it's still not over with. I was speechless, and so was my platoon as they catch up a minute later. A few of them caught up enough to witness the parking lot scene, but no one was talking. The testosterone from earlier has now been replaced with genuine concern. They all just stood there with me, catching their breath and making sure I was alright. One guy asked if anyone got a plate number. Not even I did. Not in a flight. We finally start walking back, and I'm reliving the scene as we retrace our steps. As we get closer to the original meeting spot, I see something that scares me more than anything else in the entire equation has, up to this point. On the opposite side of the pillar, where creepy McCreeperson was crouching, there is a video camera, sitting on a stand, pointing right at the spot I would have been standing at when I should have not been able to notice him. And it was still recording.